Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Evan Karatzas. I'm the founder and CEO of Proximity Lab. We are a UX research and product design firm, and we're really excited to put this discussion series together. This is the first of three around product vision design. And before I introduce the panelists, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the series and about this first session, and I'll walk you through a few quick slides. The purpose of the session is to really bring thought leaders together and have a discussion around how we approach vision-oriented product design. The idea is to focus on how we can help drive value and alignment across the organization, and to approach the topic from different perspectives, especially through the lens of product strategy, design leadership, and UX design. And over the course of the three sessions that we're going to hold, we will have a different combination of thought leaders and designers sharing their perspective. And I'll just quickly mention that the next session we're planning is tentatively scheduled for late January, so we're spacing these out a bit, but definitely keep checking in on the timing of that. And then talking about what's in it for you for this session, things that we're planning to cover. Really having a conversation to help each other connect the dots around business objectives, customer needs, and the solution that gets developed. The idea of helping team members, product team members, designers, and others be more strategic, focus on differentiated value, and to advocate for a multidisciplinary approach to product vision, not having it led and sort of conducted in a vacuum, and have more of an inclusionary approach. And then to talk about ways that we can address some of the key challenges, things that can get in the way, and ways that we can overcome those. And then making the case for investing in product vision, talking about some of the outcomes and benefits, and making the case to other stakeholders and to team members of why this is worth doing. Specifically for this first session, the focus is going to be really around starting with a definition of product vision and vision design. We're going to move into, Keela and Alissa will tell us a little bit about their experience and different approaches to how their teams have done some of this work. And we'll look at who leads and influences the vision. There'll be other dimensions to it in terms of who consumes it, and how that work gets kind of carried forward, and looking at the impact to organizations and teams. So those are the sort of focal points for this first session. So let me do this quick introduction of Keela and Alissa. Really thrilled to have both of them on today. Keela is Vice President of Product Innovation at Netflix. She oversees a product management team that oversees global member experiences across apps, web, and TV. Prior to her role at Netflix, she was VP of Engineering and Product at Expedia. She was CEO at Urban Spoon, which she sold in 2015. And she's held executive and product leadership positions at Amazon, T-Mobile, Real Networks, and others. And welcome, Keela. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Alissa Briggs is our other panelist. She's a design leader and speaker with experience scaling design, research, and content strategy teams. Her experience spans early stage startups and larger enterprise, global Fortune 500 companies. She was director and head of design at PlanGrid, which was acquired by Autodesk in 2018. And through that acquisition, she became director of design at Autodesk. Prior to that, she was head of design for employee management at solutions at Intuit, and has a great background in a variety of other companies. Welcome, Alissa.
Great to be here.
Thank you. All right. So moving into, before we move straight into the discussion, just a quick setup and getting to some definitions about what product vision and vision design is. And I'm going to offer a sort of a baseline, and I'm going to invite Alissa and Keela to challenge those definitions. And as we move into the discussion, there's, I think one thing that's clear is that a lot of this is not black and white. There are different ways of thinking and about this and approaching it. But let me just sort of start by offering a few clarifying definitions, because there can oftentimes be a lot of confusion around these topics. And I want to start by quoting a definition that appeared there's a new book that came out called The Designer's Guide to Product Vision. And it describes product vision as basically conveying the story of how our product or service will forge an idealized partnership between the company and their customer. thought that did a really nice job of just summarizing what the vision is there to do. So I would sort of elaborate on it a bit, saying that it should describe the business opportunity. It involves an understanding of who the target audience or customer is, and starts to get into describing the solution or a high-level view of the offering, whether that's a product or a service or whatever that offering is. One sort of notable clarifying statement here is it's not the detailed execution-ready version of the product, and I think that can be where a lot of miscommunication and lack of clarity is. Product vision is sort of the setup to then later on, describing and designing the more detailed expression of the experience. When we talk about what vision design is, I would sort of begin by just saying it's really the articulation or expression of the vision. And the key thing here, and we'll talk about this in our discussion, is it can take a variety of forms and it can exist in a variety of fidelity levels. And I would sort of offer up that in the early stages of exploring vision design, it really tends to take a lower fidelity role, and really the focus is on the story. So as you're starting to think about it and contemplate some of these ideas and socialize it and get feedback on it, being at a lower fidelity level and focusing on the story, I think, is key. As you move into the later stages and the teams start making decisions and think through implementation, that's when I think it tends to make more sense to move into higher fidelity, and you start moving into the execution-oriented design work. So just thinking about some of those relationships. The one last thing I'll offer up, and we'll sort of invite Keela and Alissa to join the conversation. One of the things we did in preparation for this is kind of challenged ourselves to think about a way to visualize these relationships, and sort of thinking about the things that are foundational, that inform product vision. So, looking at things like company mission and core values, that understanding of who your target customer is, what the specific market opportunity is, kind of informing business strategy, and then looking, further down at product strategy and product vision as the articulation of the solution, and differentiating between the current state, if this is an existing offering, the difference between the current state and looking ahead to a future state, and approaching that future state through incremental releases. And then also just noting that none of this is a static experience. Things are changing all the time, and primarily you've got customers and users that have an evolving set of expectations and needs, and you've got competitive pressure and competitive situation, which is influencing the way that you need to engage your customers, and it certainly impacts the way you think about your solution. So I just wanted to offer this up as sort of a one view of the world, and maybe from here I'll stop sharing. There we go. So yeah, so kind of picking it up from here. Keela, maybe you can talk a little bit about, I know some of the talks you've given in the past, there's been a real focus on core values and company mission and how it connects to the product vision work. Maybe you can share a little bit of your experience there and kind of talk about how you think about product vision to begin with.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's such an important part of product development, and often is not something that teams spend enough time really anchoring on and coming to alignment on. But ultimately, it's a little bit like the measure twice, cut once. If you have clarity around the product vision, it will help everything else in the process go so much more smoothly. And so, yeah, when I think about product vision, I do think it encompasses a lot of different components, and that's what makes it complex. Is you do need an anchoring in what it is that your company stands for, what is what's important to your business, what's important to your customers, and why you think you're going to do a better job than others out in the market, right? But then ultimately that needs to translate to something that feels a bit more tangible around the product or service that you're building. So I like to use the example of Amazon Kindle. So I joined the team after Kindle had launched, but still when that devices group was pretty young. And a lot of people know that Amazon aspires to be the world's most customer-centric company. It has fairly clear company values, right? Like when you go in, their leadership principles, their way of doing things are pretty heavily emphasized throughout that organization. And then that provides, sort of inherent leadership to what we should be building by way of products when you're at Amazon, because you know that you need to be really focused on the customer outcomes and what's important for them, including things like, selection, convenience, and value, all of which are kind of core to the Amazon approach. So the Kindle product vision, as articulated, was every book ever made in any language, all available in 60 seconds or less. Right. And so what I think is powerful about that, obviously that's just like a sentence, but it manages to encapsulate both sort of what is magical and beneficial for the customer, as well as what is going to be unique in the way that Amazon was going to approach the market, meaning, for example, having wireless capability. At the time, way back when e-readers were first introduced, they required a physical connection to upload and download books, right? And so there were aspects to that vision which also articulate their strategy, right, to go after the breadth of selection and so forth. So I think that's the ideal that you strive for when you try to get to a product vision, is to have something that helps to clarify for the team what it is that you're building at a high level, at a sort of distant level, even if it's aspirational, and why it matters to your audience and your customers.
That's great. Yeah, Alissa, looping you in, you two come from a slightly different background. You're both obviously heavily involved in product, but with Keela's background more in product strategy and product management, and your world being more design focused, maybe could you share your thoughts on how you think about product vision and what its purpose is, what's included in it? How do you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Evan and Keela did a beautiful job here of showing there's this bigger picture around articulating what your company stands for. And that's sort of like articulating what lives in everyone's hearts. However, I think everyone seems to have similar vision and mission around, do something big, change people's lives, but it's often so high level and aspirational, people don't know what to do with that. So I think where product vision comes in is it takes all the things that is our why and that we care about, and starts to make it more tangible so people can figure out what work can they do today and next week that will help get us toward changing the world in the way that we aspire to. So when I think about what a great product vision is, it's something that really paints that picture for how your product or your service is going to meaningfully change people's lives. And when I'm looking at it, I also look for things like, is this bold? Is it aspirational? Is it meaningful? And does it inspire us to connect with and actually help the people that we serve and understand what we can do as individuals in order to help with that?
That's great. Maybe Keela, going back to you, can you talk a little bit about some of the forms that you've seen product vision take? Obviously, this can be done in one of the talks that I saw you give. You covered a very long list of different delivery methods, and there's no one sort of right solution here, but can you maybe both of you can share a little bit of the different formats that you've seen, and what has been more or less effective in the storytelling side of product vision?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I do actually strongly advocate for multiple different types of multiple different methods to capture the vision, because people learn in different ways, people are inspired in different ways. And so, some people will get really fired up by reading a 10-page manifesto, right, that talks, in great detail about how you're going to change the world and what's going to be better and different. Other people really want something that feels more tangible. Maybe it is a prototype. Maybe it is, maybe it's videos of customers and talking about their jobs to be done that are not being fulfilled at the moment to inspire, right? In terms of like tactical exercises, at Amazon, they're famous for the working backwards approach of writing the press release ahead of time. I've also done exercises which, in a similar vein, what would be the New York Times headline article written about your company in 5 years, about your product line in that amount of time. Even fun sort of hands-on exercises like you envision that your product would sit on a retail shelf, right? Like in a grocery store. And what would it say on the box? So you actually build the box, you decorate the box to talk about, you know, what it is that your product is bringing to market. So I think that I would encourage not just having like your one PowerPoint presentation, at the kickoff, and then thinking that your job is over. It really isn't, right? It's a drum that you have to beat throughout a product delivery cycle, so that you keep people aligned and inspired along the way. And I think it's particularly easy for people in design, in product management, that to feel like that's not necessary, because we're so anchored to that, right? We're talking to customers, we're talking to groups throughout the organization, and we're taking a look at what's going on with the competitive dynamic. But not everybody who's actually building the product has that same level of visibility. So I think it's really important to kind of reiterate it and have exercises that people can get involved in themselves to help articulate what that vision is.
That's great. Yeah, Alissa, what's your experience been around this?
Yeah, I think that's Keela's spot on here. You once you have that vision clarified, it's so important to be telling that story in many different ways, such that it'll land differently with different people. In every company I worked at, every team, when we've done vision work, we've needed to figure out what is the culture of that team, how do people communicate about things, what convinces people, what gets them on board, and adjust how we communicate the vision in different ways. And I think something else Keela hit on that's really important is simply giving a PowerPoint deck. That can be a good first start, but the more that you can actually engage people in both crafting the vision and then understanding it afterwards, that is really, really important. So for the majority of the vision projects that I've done, what we try and do up front when we're crafting the vision is actually have people participate in some fashion, be that through workshops or going out and talking with customers with us, so that they can start to see how and where that vision is coming from. Otherwise, it could just feel like a bunch of video clips and words on a page. So we really try and engage people up front. And then afterwards, that's really beneficial, because when we share the vision, we can talk about and refer back to things that people participated in and understood. And that way they can feel more bought in, and also connect the dots between whatever our pithy vision statement is and with the bigger meaning that is behind it.
That's great. Yeah, it's sort of the way you're describing, you're both describing this, it also brings up the question of who's involved in sort of shaping this vision work. And you're both describing a very inclusionary approach. How do you, maybe back to you, Keela, in terms of who leads the vision work and who is directly involved in shaping it, what kinds of teams are involved? Is there one sort of central owner? Should there be somebody really driving this within one team? How do you see that typically work?
Yeah, I mean, I am a fan of having a single person at least like drive the process forward, because I think if it's left ambiguous, oftentimes, again, you can get into a situation in which people assume that it's there or assume that it's done, and haven't really like driven it through end to end, including through the communication and buy-in phase, which are so key. So I think it's helpful to have a single owner, but really that person could be anyone. I mean, it literally could be anybody on the team. Ideally, early on in a product development cycle, you probably should have a core team, including representation from design, from product management, from engineering, probably from customer research, right? And oftentimes it's that sort of nexus, that group, that are responsible for building on and creating and getting initial understanding of what that product vision is, before, of course, the team is scaled up further in order to have folks who are going to work on that product. Have you seen,
Keela, the team structure differ significantly between sort of Netflix and some of the other companies you've been? Is there some organizational DNA that kind of influences team structure, or is it very situational? How would you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I've certainly learned over time that it's really important to have that core team be multidisciplinary. I think that I've definitely worked on teams and in environments where, for example, product management is pretty much in charge of this whole process, and yes, gets input, but is driving forward with writing the press release and doing all of that work up front, and really, is perceived as the single owner of that. And I don't subscribe to that model, right? It is done differently at different organizations, but I'm a big proponent of both sort of autonomous teams, empowered autonomous teams, as well as multidisciplinary teams to create these types of artifacts, these types of constructs, because ultimately, if the folks who are actually working on this are not bought in, if they don't see the value that they're trying to create, then it's ultimately going to end up badly, right? They're not going to get behind and really get inspired for the work that they're being asked to do.
That's great. Alissa, what's your experience been around sort of who leads the work and who participates? I know you've got a similar like multidisciplinary view of the world. Has your experience differed at all from what Keela is describing?
Yeah, I would definitely say I have seen vision projects be the most successful when they're driven cross-functionally. I've also seen them get very far and have a lot of impact when just driven through one discipline as well. But that discipline doing a good job of making sure to socialize and bring others in for workshops and things like that. So I think it really depends. It depends on the organization and all of that. And you kind of need to figure out like, what is the actual thing that needs to be focused on? Who has the skills to do that? What is the level of trust that others in the organization have for those folks? So I think it all just depends on your organization. That said, I have primarily driven vision projects, usually with design, product, and engineering working super closely together. And also experimented a lot actually with different ways to do this. I worked at large companies where we had a very small group go off and make a vision video and like bring it back to the organization and get people excited. And then from there, additional vision strategy projects come out of that. So I think that can be one effective model. Another model, which we've been using at Autodesk, which was really effective when we were trying to figure out how to basically take our construction tools from a suite of independent products into one mega construction ecosystem. We actually ran a 6-week vision project with 50 core contributors. I've never done a vision project with a group that large before, so it was a little bit of an experiment for us, but it was incredibly effective. What we ended up doing is having sort of our high-level vision at a very, very high level around where we wanted to go, but we needed more detail from there. This was a bunch of folks who'd never worked together before as well. And so we want to use this as an opportunity for people to come together and actually create a shared vision together that everyone believed in. So we got this big group, 50 folks, plus a bunch of additional stakeholders together, carved out a 6-week project that had each work stream within this group of contributors had a leader on it. And each of those leaders then came together and coordinated. So it was like a very tightly run, very quick project. But it got us to some really awesome outcomes that have been foundational in terms of us building out our vision and our strategy for the Autodesk Construction Cloud.
That's great. The thing about the sort of early definition and getting alignment around product vision and then starting to carry that work forward and moving into execution, maybe Keela, going back to you, what are the things to look out for when you move from this very high level articulation of vision, and obviously there's a need to start planning out the work that needs to be done and prioritizing it, and obviously moving into different levels of fidelity and the expression of those experiences and features. What are some of the patterns you've seen? Like, are there some inherent challenges in just starting to break those down into smaller stories? What's your experience been there?
Yeah, I mean, almost by definition, right, a vision is going to be aspirational. And so oftentimes there is that kind of that initial shock and skepticism of trying to get from something that has, hopefully, if you've done a good job, is now like everybody's excited about and they think is like really aspirational and very interesting. And then it's like, what is going to be the V1? And then it's this major letdown in terms of like, what can we actually deliver in a reasonable amount of time, right? And so having said that, I think the more successful folks who can bridge that gap and get from, like this, a more grandiose vision into something that is something that can be executed on and iterated from, usually comes down to people being really clear around where, a little bit like in a lean startup way, where if you could be really clear around what are the risks to the business, what are the risks in terms of this concept being accurate, and really trying to understand and go after what are the iterations that will help us best resolve that, and get to learning, get to validated learning about whether or not this this approach is viable. So in many cases, there are going to be a few different approaches from at least from a technology perspective, and certainly from a design perspective, that you can execute and get to the vision. So really, you know, your first job is to make sure that you're heading in the right direction in terms of, you know, the high level approach that you're taking, from both a sort of a technical perspective as well as from a design perspective.
That's great. Yeah, listen, maybe having you pick up from there, is there, you know, there are sort of net new products where the vision is sort of, you know, carving out a whole new experience. And then there's, you know, legacy experience and existing product lines where, you know, the vision needs to be somehow rationalized and reconciled with a current set of capabilities. So how do I think you've been in both of those environments. You know, I think PlanGrid was more of a kind of net new offering, where Autodesk, obviously there's a lot of capability and legacy there. Is there, does the way that the vision work relates to sort of existing capabilities, is that a different mindset and a different set of activities versus kind of speculating on an experience that really is new and hasn't been created before?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the ways I like to think about vision and strategy is you kind of figure out, like, long term, I want to get here, right? And this is your vision. So this is the change I want to be in the world. But also there's a very important aspect when you're building out your strategy of sitting down and looking at where you're at today and being very realistic about what do we have out in market, what's working, what's not, what's our constraints, what team do we have, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what does the market look like? And then from there, you build your strategy, which is basically that path or that ladder of how you get from current day to the future vision. And so what I have found for sure is if you're starting here as like brand new startup, don't really have that much built, but you have a small team, you have a lot of constraints, you don't have a lot of money, absolutely your strategy to get here needs to be different than if you're a big company where you've got really good, established, healthy business, but there's risks involved of how much do we spend, money, time, resources, brain power on supporting what we have today versus moving towards the future. So I think that's where having clarity around that vision and then taking a look at the delta between where you're at today and where you want to go and looking at all the constraints around you can help you to come up with multiple proposed paths of how could we get from A to B and actually map those out and have a couple different strategic approaches. So as an example, when we decided to go again at Autodesk from having a suite of products to having a full-on unified platform and suite and more of an ecosystem. In that moment, we had to think about what are all the different ways we could approach that from a technology perspective, from an experience perspective. What are the trade-offs we're going to have to make along the way? Depending on these 5 different approaches we could take, which ones do we think are most realistic for us, are going to bring the most value for all of our customers, are going to bring in new customers? And so I think that's where actually having folks on your team who are very strategic minded and able to kind of break down and articulate these different things, and then working across the organization. And I don't mean just product engineering design. I also mean your sales team, your support team, working with customers to kind of vet and evaluate the different approaches you could be taking, helps you make the right decisions for the short term, and then gut check those and check and see, is this getting us towards the vision along the way as you take the next step and the next step and the next step towards your vision.
That's great. Keela, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, of course, you'd like to believe that vision is going to be fairly long-term, several years, usually out is I feel like the right target market, at least in technology. You know, I think, I'm sure it's different in different industries. But you also have to be open to change, right? I mean, things will change along the way in terms of what's even possible, what's viable in the market. Sometimes you overshoot and you think like, hey, by a few years out, we should have this kind of hardware or network or whatever kind of capability. And therefore, we're going to make certain assumptions based on that. And those don't pan out, right? In other cases, competitors come in and cut off some things that you thought were going to be really differentiating. So I agree that I think it's something to check in on and periodically redo some of those foundational exercises.
Do you see a rhythm to the vision work where it gets does it get sort of tweaked along the way? Is there a more substantial effort to kind of reevaluate the product vision every few years? Like what's your experience been, Keela, and then to you, Alissa?
Yeah, I mean, in my own industry, given that I'm focused primarily on software, things change enough, and especially on the consumer side, that pretty much once a year, it's worth checking in, and I consider it kind of as part of a health check of the business, that you want to make sure that you're focused on the right priorities, that you have a good sense of what's going on in your overall portfolio of work. So how many people are working on, like keeping the current business, current solutions running and fine-tuned versus what percent are working on these, bigger bets that are more speculative and so forth. So I think there are a set of things that you want to do, in my opinion, on more of an annual cadence, which includes checking in on that, checking in on your team allocations, and making sure that everybody's clear on the priorities for the next big chunk of work.
To you, Alissa?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even with a very stable business, it's very important to continue to check in on the vision on a 6 or 12-month cadence, just to make sure the work you're doing actually is going that direction. And also to check, has anything changed in the market that would necessitate us reconsidering any aspects of the vision. That said, if you've got the right vision, ideally it's not actually changing that often, but I think coming back and revisiting it can be really, really healthy. One thing I actually just wanted to mention in terms of businesses that are maybe less established, I do think that there can be a natural expansion of the vision over time and becoming more and more bold. So an example of this would be when I was working at PlanGrid, for the first couple of years that I was there, the vision was very much around creating this best-in-class product to help folks in the field within construction sites to get their work done. And over time, we actually ended up delivering on that vision. It was a big and aspirational thing when the company was founded, but over time, by moving really fast and just seeing a lot of success, the team basically accomplished that. And so we realized, we need to go bigger. We need to think about what that next thing is. And so the design team actually had a request from our leadership team to go out and help envision what the future could be beyond that. And so we actually got a group together and did some really cool, really exciting work going out to our customers and dreaming with them and looking at their worlds and thinking about what could the future be here. And then of course, working really closely with other leaders in the organization to think about the business strategy and what was happening in the market and all that. And from there, we actually created a vision that was extremely bold and aspirational, and that then sparked a lot of new projects, new initiatives, and a lot of other ways we were able to impact our customers positively.
That's great. It's really nice to hear about those. It's a great problem to have where you've kind of already arrived at the vision and need to go broader. Staying with you, Alissa, a little bit on the question of fidelity, and as we move beyond that initial vision and the teams start executing around specific concepts and features, what's your experience been around like how soon to move into higher levels of fidelity and some of the concept work? There's a debate, I think, out there about, there's pros and cons, obviously, to being in high fidelity. I think some of the things I've experienced is people can get very fixated around execution details and miss the bigger vision. On the other side of that, I have found that when we move into higher fidelity designs, it does force you to think through some of it, especially at the content level. If you're doing sort of an analytics-based view, if you're gray boxing everything, you're not really solving for okay, what is in focus here? What's the hierarchy? What are the things that people need to pay attention to? So how do you think about the balance between, you know, lower fidelity and higher fidelity, and does that just gradually get more, you know, higher fidelity over time as you get closer to, you know, actual execution release?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think you laid out the different arguments very, very well there. So again, as with anything, it depends, and you really need to know your organization and the folks that you're working with. One thing I actually tend to see is actually, I think people maybe shy away from bringing a certain level of fidelity to their vision, because there's a lot that's been written out there about like, get the 10-word vision down and everything will follow and all that. And I think getting the 10-word vision down can be great and leaves a lot of space for other people to come to the table with ideas and all that. So I think in some situations that's wonderful. But I often see a lot of companies that actually only stay at the 10 level vision description, and then no one knows what the heck they're doing or what that means or how to internalize it. And so something that should be helping them understand where to go ends up just creating confusion, and people kind of spend more time debating whether or not a project lines up to the 10-word description than actually understanding what that means. So just to give like a very specific example about this, I was working at a startup in the past where from day one, the company had a really bold, inspiring mission and vision. And it's the kind of thing, it was so aspirational. People were so excited about it. People would get on board, and then they'd, you know, interview and join the company, and they'd show up and be like, okay, but what are we doing? And no one had an answer. And there was like a big document with a lot of theory and philosophy and all this stuff that was very theoretical about the vision. And no one knew what the heck it actually meant. So after a while of seeing this happening, I actually worked with some folks in the organization to say, okay, that's a good starting place. It's good to know that's big picture what we want to do, but we need a little more granularity here for people to understand this. So we actually went and did a series of vision workshops and brainstorms and things with teams that then helped us move from that very high level Word document to something more specific with some like storyboards and examples, like simple gray box examples of how this could actually look in practice. And I think we did a good job of hitting just enough fidelity that people could understand what this was talking about and how it might fit into someone's life without going so far as to say, okay, and here's the colors, and here's the exact UI, and here's the exact elements. And that really, really helped align people and understand, oh, this is what I'm working on. And then from there, be able to take that back and do much more specific and detailed product and design thinking.
That's great. Yeah, Keela, what's your experience been, this sort of collaboration between, you know, product strategy, product management, and design around fidelity? Is there a natural progression? Is it a less perfect path? Is it what's your sense been around that sort of fidelity question?
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely hit the nail on the head in saying like there's hazard in being on either side of the extreme there, right? And I certainly have been in situations where, because it looked so real, so realistic, not only were we getting feedback that was actually not the right feedback for that moment in time, it was too detail oriented, but then you've planted a seed that like, oh, this is almost done, right? And 9 times out of 10, it's, you know, it's all vaporware behind there. So you actually then have to walk back. Well, actually, it's going to take another, you know, X amount of time to get this to market, and that then starts to become a source of frustration. So having said that, right, I do think it is important to have enough fidelity that what you're trying to do with a vision in that regard is you're trying to empower the team. You're trying to give them enough context so that they can then make autonomous, independent decisions that are in alignment with where it is that you're trying to go. So to Alyssa's point, right, if it's too high level of a direction, then people aren't really able to be autonomous, or they can interpret it however they want, right? So one of the reasons why I do think that the press release exercise is pretty interesting is that it forces a degree of specificity around what exactly are you bringing to market, what is the value proposition, and set of supporting points that will make this a robust product offering. You know, by definition, it's not going to have such great detail that you know every bell and whistle that might be a component of that product. But what I found, for example, just taking a product management lens with respect to prioritizing features and what's important, is that exercise oftentimes would tell me if I had a force rank backlog 1 through 10, I might find that actually in order to really nail 1 through 3, because in a press release you can only really talk about 3 meaty things, I wanted to actually up level some of the things that were lower in priority down at the 7, 8, you know, 9 kind of priority level, because they help to complement that message and that story. So I think really kind of taking it from the perspective of, will whatever it is that I'm building, will it help to empower people to be more autonomous and make decisions rapidly? I think that's the objective that you're trying to hit with this.
That's great. We're getting pretty close to the end. We've got about 5 minutes left. I thought maybe the last topic we could hit was just talking a little bit about some general advice and maybe some lessons learned. And I was going to offer one just from experience around some of the traps sometimes with vision design where anything is possible. And I think one of the things I've learned over time is the real power of an effective vision is around being free. It's sort of the art and science of this, being free to explore these possibilities, but then grounding those in real business need and making sure that this is, you know, there's differentiated value coming out of these, and that it's really in alignment with what the business is trying to accomplish, obviously, and, you know, and what customers need. But I think that it can be very seductive for designers to imagine anything that's possible and not really do the heavy lifting of, you know, being critical about, you know, within this vision, what is really delivering value, what is truly differentiating us from others. I think that's a sign of a mature product and design team. But maybe just offer it up, Alissa, if you want to share your thoughts either around that or just other general advice as we wind down.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a really important point there around if the vision is something that contains like rocket ships and things that, you know, read your brain, like that could be a great vision, depending on your organization, but for a lot of places, that's not going to be helpful or productive. So one of the things that I was trying to do upfront when doing a vision project is making sure to check in with the most relevant stakeholders around how far out do we want to go, how big do we want to go, how aspirational, and as the vision is starting to come together, checking in along the way to see, are we fitting this into the right altitude? Are we being too crazy aspirational or focused too far out? Or are we being focused too short term? And so I think there's a little bit of a negotiation that needs to happen there. And what I recommend folks doing is, you know, start with the stakeholders, but then go quickly to putting like a rough high level draft together and then loop back and get feedback on that. Is it hitting the right altitude? Are there areas that people are feeling are missing or are being overexplored? And continue to check in throughout. Whenever I'm doing vision projects, let's say it's a 6-week long or a 2-month long thing, I try and have stakeholder check-ins every week, and for, in some situations, multiple times a week, just because this work is so important. And ultimately, at the end, you need your stakeholders and your leadership team to be the ones who are helping you sell this vision. So make sure to work with them to help be your tether. And I often think of it as like, you know, designers, we have a tendency to be like these little balloons and we just want to go up into the atmosphere and see the sun and do all these things. And you need to have a tether. So figure out who your tether is going to be and then stay connected with them, and they'll help you stay grounded.
That's great advice. Keela, any closing thoughts on your side?
Yeah, I mean, not surprisingly, I think again, it comes down to being really crisp about what is your strategy, what is your differentiation, what are you bringing to the market that is ultimately going to sway your customer one way or the other to choose your solution, to choose your product, and making sure that that shines through in whatever it is that you're building, that shines through. There are going to be lots of other things that may make it a little bit more delightful, a little bit easier, a little bit better, right? But at the end of the day, there's probably only a few things that are going to make the real difference between do they choose your product or do they choose a competitor or some other type of solution. and just making sure that the team is super focused on having that be central throughout the vision and subsequent iterations of it.
Great. Really can't thank you both enough for spending the time and sharing your experience. We're really lucky to have both of you. Thanks for taking time. Just in quick closing, thanks to everybody who attended. We are going to be sharing this video online as well. Anybody who registered will get a link to the recording in a few days once we've pulled that together. And then if there's any feedback you have around this first session, or that there are questions that you'd like us to explore in subsequent sessions, please reach out to us. You can email me at evan@proximitylab.com, and we'll be posting more details on our site. It's www.proximitylab.com. Once we announce the date for the second session, I can tell you that the January session will be primarily around going into some case studies for vision work, so getting a little bit more of a show and tell around different ways that work can happen. And again, thanks to both of you for your time, and thanks for joining us.